The transport ship Eternal Dawn was 3 days from its destination when the engines exploded. Park. Doan had been sleeping in the lower cargo hold when the first blast threw him from his cot. He hit the metal floor hard, felt his ribs scream in protest, and then the second explosion came. The lights died. Emergency red replaced them, painting everything in blood. He had worked on ships before. He knew that sound. That was the sound of a vessel dying. Dohan grabbed the support beam above him and pulled himself up. The floor was tilting now, the whole ship groaning like a wounded animal. Smoke poured through the ventilation. Somewhere above, he heard screaming in languages he did not understand. The Eternal Dawn carried 200 passengers. Most of them were aliens. The Helix with their crystalline bodies. The Vorn with their forearms and superior attitudes. The Talic who built ships that could cross galaxies in days. Humans were rare on these routes. Doan had counted only 5 others besides himself. He ran. The corridors were chaos. Helix passengers were trying to activate their personal shields, but the ship's power failure had killed the charging stations. Their expensive technology was useless. Vorn crew members were shouting orders that nobody followed. A Talic family stood frozen near an escape pod. Jabbing at a door panel that would not respond, Doan pushed past them all. He found the first human in the medical bay. Yuna was pressed against the wall, holding a bleeding cut on her forehead. She was a xenobiologist, he remembered. They had spoken once in the dining hall. She had laughed at one of his jokes. She was not laughing now. "The escape pods are locked," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "The system crashed. Nobody can open them. And we don't use the pods," Doan said. He grabbed her arm. "Come with me." They found the second human near the cargo bay. Kim Taiwan was the pilot who had been ferrying supplies in the lower hold. He was pinned under a fallen storage unit, his leg twisted at a bad angle. Blood pooled beneath him. "Leave me," Taiwan groaned. "Get to the pods." "Pods are dead," Doan said. He crouched down and studied the storage unit. It was heavy, but not impossible. "Yuna, help me lift." Together, they raised the unit just enough for Taiwan to drag himself free. The pilot screamed when his leg moved. Doan ignored the sound. There was no time for gentle. "Can you walk?" Doan asked. "No," Taiwan admitted. "But I can crawl." The ship lurched again. Through a cracked viewport, Doan saw the planet below. Red sand. Endless desert. No cities, no water, no life. He knew this world. Every spacer knew it. Velaris 7, the dead planet. The place where ships went to die. "We're going down," Yuna whispered. "Yes," Doan said. "So we need to be ready when we land." He led them to the emergency supply room. Most of the lockers were keyed to alien biometrics. The Helix supplies needed crystalline DNA. The Vorn equipment required 4-handed activation. The Talic gear simply refused to recognize human touch. But in the corner, forgotten and dusty, was a single human emergency kit. Standard issue. Basic supplies. 2 liters of water. A first aid pack. A thermal blanket. A knife. Duhan took it all. The crash came 90 seconds later. Duhan remembered heat. He remembered the sound of metal tearing like paper. He remembered wrapping his body around Yuna as the world spun and shattered around them. He remembered thinking that this was how he would die on a dead planet, far from home, surrounded by aliens who had never learned his name. Then there was silence. He opened his eyes. Smoke. Fire. The twisted skeleton of the app. Eternal dawn spread across the red sand like a broken toy. Bodies everywhere. Helix crystals shattered into powder. Vorn limbs bent in impossible directions. Talic technology sparking and dying in the heat. Doan was alive. He checked Yuna, unconscious but breathing. Cuts and bruises, but nothing broken. He checked Taiwan. The pilot had passed out from pain, but his chest was rising and falling. 3 humans. Out of 200 passengers, 3 humans had survived. Doan stood slowly. His legs were weak. His head was pounding. But he was alive, and that meant there was work to do. He walked through the wreckage. The alien bodies did not disturb him. He had seen death before. What disturbed him was what he saw in their hands. Emergency beacons that had never activated. Survival pods that had never opened. Medical equipment that had never deployed. The most advanced species in the galaxy, with technology that humans could only dream of. And they had died because their tools had failed them. They had stood there waiting for their devices to save them. The devices had not come. Doan found a Talic officer still clutching a rescue beacon. The device was cracked, its screen dark. The officer's face was frozen in confusion, as if he could not understand why the universe had betrayed him. "You trusted the machine," Doan said quietly. "You forgot how to trust yourself." He returned to Yuna and Taiwan. The sun was rising higher now, and the temperature was climbing fast. 60 degrees, maybe more. In a few hours, the heat would kill them as surely as the crash. Yuna woke with a gasp. She looked around at the destruction, at the bodies, at the endless red desert stretching to the horizon, and her face went pale. "The beacon," she said. "We need to find a working beacon." "There are none," Doan said. "I checked. Everything is dead or locked to alien biology. And what do we do?" Her voice cracked. "There's nothing here. No water, no shelter. No way to call for help. We're going to die." Doan looked at her. Then he looked at the desert. The sand was red and fine, almost like powder. It sparkled slightly in the sunlight. Silicon, high silicon content. He had worked with materials like this on Mars. "No," he said. "We're not going to die." "How can you say that? Look around you. We have nothing." Doan reached down and picked up a handful of sand. He let it pour through his fingers, watching it catch the light. "We have sand," he said. "We have sunlight. We have our hands and our minds." He looked at Yuna, and something hard and certain settled in his eyes. "That's enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to build." Yuna stared at him like he had gone insane. Maybe he had. But insanity was better than despair. Despair would kill them faster than the heat. "Help me move Taiwan into the shade," Doan said. "Then we start working. We have maybe 6 hours before the temperature becomes deadly. That's 6 hours to find water, build shelter, and figure out how to survive." "That's impossible." Doan smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had decided to fight the universe itself. "Possible is just a word," he said. "Humans have been beating impossible since we climbed down from the trees. This desert thinks it can kill us." He shook his head. "This desert has no idea what it's dealing with." Turned and walked toward the wreckage, already planning, already building in his mind. Behind him, Yuna watched him go. She did not understand his confidence. She did not share his certainty. But she had nothing else to believe in, so she followed him. The sun was a hammer, and the desert was the anvil, and the 3 humans were caught between them. Doan worked through the heat. His skin burned. His throat was dry. Sweat poured from his body faster than he could drink, and they had so little water. But he could not stop. Stopping meant dying. Yuna stayed with Taiwan in the shadow of a broken hull section. The pilot's leg was bad. The bone was not broken, but something inside was torn. He needed rest, medicine, and proper care. They had none of these things. So Yuna did what she could with what she had. She tore strips from her own clothing to make bandages. She found antiseptic in the human emergency kit and cleaned the wounds. When Taiwan's fever began to rise, she searched through her research samples and found cultures of a cooling bacteria she had been studying. She mixed them with water and applied the paste to his forehead. It was not medicine. It was desperation wearing the mask of science. But it worked, at least for now. "You're a xenobiologist," Taiwan said weakly. "You study alien life." "Yes." "Why are you so good at human medicine?" Yuna smiled, but there was no joy in it. "Because I grew up poor. When you can't afford doctors, you learn to take care of yourself and everyone you love." Taiwan nodded. He understood. Many humans understood. That was the thing about humanity. They had never been given anything. They had earned every step, fought for every breath, clawed their way up from the mud to the stars. The aliens called them primitive. The aliens called them lucky. The aliens never understood that human history was written in blood and determination. Outside, Doan was collecting. He moved through the wreckage like a man possessed. He ignored the advanced alien technology. The Helix medical pods would not respond to his touch. The Vorin communication devices demanded biometric signatures he could not provide. The Tau-X survival equipment mocked him with its useless elegance. Instead, he gathered simple things. Metal sheets torn from the hull, wiring ripped from dead consoles, a cracked solar panel that still caught light, broken glass from viewports, the reflective dish from a destroyed Vorin escape pod. An alien would look at these things and see garbage. Doan looked at them and saw survival. By midday, the temperature had reached 65 degrees. The air shimmered. Breathing hurt. Yuna's lips were cracked. Taiwan had stopped speaking, conserving his strength. Doan kept working. He carried his collection to a flat area near the wreckage and began to build. The reflective dish became the base of something new. He angled it toward the sun, adjusting the curve until the light focused to a single bright point. Then he added the metal framing, creating a stable mount. Yuna came to watch. "What is that?" "Solar concentrator," Doan said. He did not look up. His hands moved with practiced certainty. Oldest technology humans ever invented. We used it to melt, or before we had electricity. We used it to cook before we had fire. "What will you melt here?" Dohan pointed at the ground. "Sand," Yuna blinked. "Sand. This sand is rich in silicon. Heated enough, it becomes glass. Glass can be shaped. Shaped glass becomes walls. Walls become shelter." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were burning with something beyond heat. "Give me time and I will build us a house from nothing but sunlight and dirt." She wanted to argue. She wanted to say that it was impossible, that glass was fragile, that they would die before he finished. But she had seen the alien bodies in the wreckage. She had seen what trust in technology had earned them, so she knelt beside him and said, "Show me how to help." They worked together through the afternoon. The solar concentrator heated a small patch of sand until it glowed orange, then white. Slowly, painfully, it began to melt. The first result was ugly. A lumpy, impure mass of fused silicon that barely held together. But it was solid. It was real. "It's glass," Yuna whispered. She touched the cooling surface and felt its hardness. "You actually made glass." "Bad glass," Doan admitted. "But it will get better. Everything gets better with practice." The sun began to set. The hammer lifted, but a new enemy approached. The temperature was dropping fast. What had been 65 degrees at noon became 40 at sunset. By midnight, it would be below zero. The desert was a place of extremes. It gave no mercy in heat and none in cold. They moved Taiwan to a small depression in the ground, surrounded by the wreckage. Doan covered the area with metal sheets, creating a crude roof. He lined the floor with insulation torn from the ship's walls. It was not warm. It was barely shelter. But it blocked the wind. The night came, and the cold came with it. Yuna lay beside Taiwan, sharing body heat. The pilot was shivering despite his fever. She held him and thought about home. She thought about her mother's kitchen and the smell of food cooking. She thought about warmth and safety and all the things she had taken for granted. Doan did not sleep. He sat at the entrance of their shelter, watching the stars. They were beautiful here, far from any city light. Millions of them scattered across the black sky like scattered diamonds. Somewhere up there, ships were traveling between worlds. People were eating dinner, talking to their families, living their lives without knowing that 3 humans were fighting for survival on a dead planet. "You should rest," Yuna said quietly. "I will," Doan said, but he did not move. "What are you thinking about?" He was silent for a long moment. Then, he said, "I'm thinking about why we lived and they died." Yuna understood. The aliens had been stronger, smarter, more advanced. They had technology that humans could not dream of. And yet they had died in the crash, or died waiting for rescue, or died because their tools had failed them. They depended on their machines, she said. Yes. Doan picked up a handful of sand and let it fall through his fingers. They evolved with technology. For them, tools are like hands. When the tools broke, they were helpless. They didn't know how to survive without them. And humans. Doan smiled in the darkness. Humans evolved without anything. We had no claws, no fangs, no armor. We were soft and weak and slow. But we learned to think. We learned to adapt. We learned that when you have nothing, you can still make something. He held up a piece of the crude glass he had made. It was ugly and imperfect, but in the starlight, it almost glowed. This is what makes us human, he said. Not our ships or our weapons or our technology. Those are just things we made. What makes us human is the making itself. The refusal to accept that something is impossible. The stubborn, stupid belief that we can always find another way. Yuna watched him for a long moment. Then she asked, "Do you really believe we can survive this?" Dohan looked at the glass in his hand. Then he looked at the desert, at the endless sand stretching to the horizon, at the cold stars watching from above. "I believe we have to try," he said, "and I believe that trying is enough." The night passed slowly. The cold bit deep. Taiwan's fever rose and fell. Yuna drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by dreams of fire and falling. But when the sun rose, they were still alive, and Doan was already working. 7 days on a dead planet. 7 days of heat and cold and endless work. 7 days of learning how to live when everything said they should die. Doan's hands were burned and calloused. The solar concentrator produced incredible heat, and sometimes that heat found his skin. He did not complain. Pain was just the body's way of telling you that you were still alive. He kept working. The glass production improved each day. On the first day, he made lumpy, ugly masses that barely held together. On the second day, he learned to control the temperature, producing smoother sheets. By the third day, he was making curved panels, using wet sand as a mold to shape the molten glass. Yuna watched and learned. She was a scientist. She understood processes and systems. Soon she was helping with the production, timing the heating cycles, preparing the molds, cooling the finished pieces at the right speed to prevent cracking. "You're good at this," Doan said on the fourth day. "I'm good at understanding how things work," she replied. "You're good at making them work in the first place." Together they built. The first wall went up on day 4. It was curved, following the natural shape that Doan had discovered was strongest. Glass did not like straight lines and sharp corners. Glass wanted to flow, to bend, to curve like water frozen in time. So Doan gave it what it wanted, and in return, the glass gave them shelter. The wall was beautiful in a strange way. It caught the sunlight and scattered it into rainbows. It blocked the wind, but let the light through. It was not perfect. There were bubbles and impurities, but it stood, and that was what mattered. Taewon watched from the shade, growing stronger each day. Yuna's strange bacterial treatment had worked better than any of them expected. The fever broke on day 3. By day 5, he could sit up and talk. By day 6, he was helping where he could, sorting materials and preparing sand for melting. "I was a pilot," he said as he worked. "I flew ships between stars. I thought I was important." He looked at Doan, who was carefully placing another glass panel. "Now I understand. The people who build things are the important ones. Anyone can drive a car. Not everyone can build the road." Doan did not respond. He was focused on his work. But Yuna saw him smile. The nights remained cold, but the single wall helped. It blocked the worst of the wind and reflected their body heat back toward them. Each day, they added more. Each day, the shelter grew. On the 5th day, Yuna made a discovery. She had been studying the native microbes, tiny life forms that lived in the sand. Most planets had some form of microscopic life, even hostile ones like Valoris 7. These microbes had evolved to survive the extreme temperatures. And Yuna wanted to understand how. What she found amazed her. They produce water, she told Doan. Her voice was shaking with excitement. Not much. Just tiny amounts. But at night, when the temperature drops, they release moisture as part of their biological cycle. Can we collect it? I think so. If we create surfaces that are cooler than the air, the moisture will collect there. Like dew on grass in the morning? Out. Doan thought about this. Then he went back to his glass production. But this time, he made something different. Thin, curved panels with grooves running down their surface. He placed them at angles around the shelter, positioned to catch the cold night air. That night, Una watched the panels. As the temperature dropped, tiny drops of water appeared on the glass surfaces. The drops rolled down the grooves and collected in containers Doan had made from bent metal. By morning, they had a full cup of water. It was not much. It was barely enough to keep one person alive. But it was water that had not existed before. Water that they had created from nothing but knowledge and desperation. This is impossible, Tywin whispered when he saw the water. We're making water in a desert. Nothing is impossible, Una said. She was smiling for the first time since the crash. Some things are just very difficult. The shelter grew faster now. Doan had developed a system. He made glass panels during the day and placed them in the cool morning hours before the heat became unbearable. The structure took shape, a dome rising from the red sand like a strange flower. On day 7, the dome was complete. It was small. 3 people could barely lie down inside without touching each other. The glass was imperfect, filled with bubbles and slight cracks. The door was just a gap covered with metal sheeting. But it was shelter. Real shelter. Protection from the sun, the wind, the cold. A place where humans could live instead of merely survive. That night, a sandstorm came. It was a small storm, nothing like the monsters that could bury cities. But the wind howled and the sand flew, striking the dome like 1,000 tiny fists. Una held her breath. Tywin pressed himself against the far wall. They waited for the glass to shatter, for their shelter to collapse, for the desert to finally claim its victims. The storm passed. The dome stood. There were new scratches on the glass. Some of the panels had shifted slightly, but the structure had held. The curves that Doan had built, following the natural strength of glass, had deflected the wind and the sand. It worked, Una breathed. It actually worked. Doan examined the damage carefully. His face was unreadable, but his hands were shaking slightly. He had not been sure. He had built based on theory and hope and pure, stubborn will. The fact that it had worked was almost as surprising to him as it was to the others. It needs to be stronger, he said finally. That was a small storm. The big ones will be worse. How do you make it stronger? Doan thought about this. He looked at the glass walls, at the sand around them, at the materials they had collected. Then his eyes narrowed. Layers, he said. Glass alone is brittle. But glass mixed with sand layered together, that's stronger. Like bone? Bone isn't solid. It's layers of hard and soft material working together. Can you do that? Doan looked at her. His eyes were tired. His body was exhausted. But somewhere deep inside, a fire was still burning. I can try, he said. That's all I can ever do. Try. Tywin pulled himself up and limped toward them. His leg was still weak, but he was moving now. Then we try together, he said. You showed us how to make glass. Now show us how to make this desert stone. Doan looked at his 2 companions, a scientist and a pilot. Neither of them had ever built anything with their hands. Neither of them had ever survived on nothing but will and desperation. But they were human, and humans learned. Tomorrow, Doan said. We start tomorrow. We're going to build something that even this planet can't destroy. He looked out at the desert, at the endless red sand, at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and then we're going to build more. The sky turned red on the 10th day, and Dohan knew death was coming. He had seen this color before. In videos and simulations during his training on Mars, It was the color of a planet preparing to scour itself clean. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a sandstorm was forming. Not a small storm like the one they had survived. This was something different. This was a monster. How long? Una asked. She stood beside him, watching the distant sky darken. 3 days. Maybe 4. Doan's voice was flat. He was calculating, planning, refusing to feel the fear that wanted to rise in his chest. Storms like this last for days. Wind speeds over 300 kilometers per hour. Temperature drops to 40 below zero. Sand moves like water, burying everything in its path. The dome won't survive. No. Doan turned to face her. His eyes were hard, determined. Not as it is. We need to make it stronger. In 3 days. We don't have a choice. They worked without rest. Doan taught them the new technique he had developed, the layered method that created what he called desert stone. The process was simple in theory, complex in practice. Melt sand into glass. While the glass is still hot, press it against a layer of raw sand. Melt more glass on top. Repeat until the layers bond together into something stronger than either material alone. The first attempts failed. The layers cracked. The sand did not bond properly. Glass shattered under its own weight. But with each failure, they learned. They adjusted the temperatures. They changed the timing. They discovered that certain types of sand worked better than others by the end of the first day. They had produced a small section of desert stone. It was ugly, rough, the color of rust and dried blood. But when Dohan struck it with a metal rod, it held. When he pressed against it with all his weight, it did not crack. This is stronger than the glass alone, he said. Maybe stronger than anything we could have made with proper tools. But we need so much of it, Una said. She looked at the dome, at the thin glass walls that had seemed so miraculous just days ago. We need to cover the entire structure. Then we work faster. They worked in shifts now. Doan and Una during the day, when the solar concentrator was most effective. Taiwan at night, preparing materials and resting by rotation. They slept in short bursts, 2 or 3 hours at a time. They ate the last of their emergency rations and drank the precious water collected from the morning dew. On the 11th day, the sky grew darker. The red had spread, covering half the horizon. The air felt different, charged with electricity and tension. Sand began to blow in occasional gusts, testing their defenses. Doan pushed harder. His hands were raw, covered in burns and cuts. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. But he could not stop. Every hour they delayed was an hour the storm grew closer. Una collapsed on the afternoon of day 11. Taiwan found her lying in the sand near the water collectors. He carried her inside and laid her on the floor of the dome. Her pulse was weak. Her breathing was shallow. Dehydration, Doan said when he saw her. Heat exhaustion. She's been giving her water rations to us. We need to stop, Taiwan said. We need to rest. If we stop, we die. If we kill ourselves working, we die anyway. Taiwan grabbed Doan's arm, forcing him to look away from the walls. You're not a machine. You're human. Humans have limits. Doan stared at him. For a moment, something cracked in his expression. The exhaustion, the fear, the weight of keeping them all alive showed through. Then he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. 1 hour, he said. We rest for 1 hour. Then we go back to work. They sat together in the dome, 3 humans at the edge of survival. Una woke slowly, confused and weak. Doan made her drink water, more than she wanted. Taiwan found dried microbe paste that Una had prepared from her research cultures. It tasted terrible, but it had nutrients. I'm sorry, Una whispered. I slowed us down. You kept us alive, Doan said. Without your water collectors, we would have died days ago. Without your bacterial treatment, Taiwan would have lost his leg to infection. You have nothing to apologize for. She looked at him, at the burns on his hands, at the exhaustion in his face. You haven't slept in 2 days. I'll sleep when the storm passes. What if it doesn't pass? What if we don't survive? Doan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my father was a construction worker. He built buildings on Earth before the sky turned dark and we had to move underground. He used to tell me that every building is a promise that people will have shelter, a promise that life will continue. Even if the builder dies, the building remains. He touched the wall of the dome. Desert stone, rough and ugly and strong. If we don't survive, someone will find this place someday. They'll see what we built. They'll know that humans were here, that we fought, that we refused to give up. That's worth something. That's worth everything. The hour passed. They went back to work. The storm arrived on day 12. It came faster than Doan had predicted. One moment, the horizon was dark. The next moment, the world disappeared. Wind struck the dome like a physical force. Sand poured through every crack and gap. The temperature dropped so fast that their breath turned to fog. They sealed themselves inside. Doan had prepared for this, leaving gaps in the desert stone covering where he could apply emergency repairs. He had rigged a small version of the solar concentrator to work with stored heat, giving them a way to melt glass even without sunlight. For the first 6 hours, they just survived. The noise was incredible, a constant roar that made communication impossible. Sand hissed against the walls. The structure groaned and shifted. Cracks appeared in the desert stone, thin lines that spread like living things. Doan patched them. As fast as the cracks appeared, he melted fresh glass and sand into the gaps. His hands moved automatically, driven by instinct and desperation. Yuna held the materials for him. Taiwan watched for new damage, pointing and shouting over the wind. The storm continued through the night. And the next day? And the night after that? 40-8 hours of constant battle? 48 hours of fighting the planet itself? On the third night, the worst damage came. A section of wall near the entrance began to fail. The desert stone cracked in a dozen places at once, overwhelmed by the force of the wind and sand. Cold air rushed in. The temperature inside dropped 20 degrees in seconds. We're losing it, Taiwan shouted. Duhan ran to the damaged section. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurred with exhaustion. But he could see the problem. The wall was too thin here, not enough layers. He needed to reinforce it, but there was no time for proper desert stone. He did the only thing he could. He pressed his body against the wall, blocking the cracks with his own flesh. The cold bit into him like knives. Sand scraped against his skin. He felt blood running from a dozen small cuts. Melt the glass, he screamed. Apply it directly. Don't worry about me. Yuna hesitated. The melted glass would burn him. There was no way to avoid it. Do I tea? She did it. Doan screamed as the hot glass touched his arms, his shoulders, his back. But he held his position. The glass flowed into the cracks, fusing with the desert stone, sealing the damage. Yuna applied layer after layer, working as fast as she could, crying as she burned the man who had kept them alive. When it was done, Doan collapsed. He did not get up. Yuna and Taiwan carried him to the center of the dome, away from the walls. His burns were severe. His body was cold despite the wounds. His breathing was shallow and fast. He's going to die, Taiwan said. His voice was hollow. No, Yuna's voice was fierce. He doesn't get to die. Not after everything he's done. Not after everything he's taught us. She worked through the rest of the storm, treating his wounds with the same desperate creativity that Doan had used to build their shelter. She used microbe paste to fight infection. She used strips of fabric soaked in cooling bacteria to bring down his fever. She used her own body heat to keep him warm. The storm ended on the morning of day 14. The silence was shocking. After 48 hours of constant noise, the absence of sound felt like a physical weight. Taiwan pushed open the entrance and looked outside. The wreckage was gone. The remains of the eternal dawn, the bodies of the aliens, the debris that had marked their crash site, all of it had been erased. The desert was smooth and clean, as if nothing had ever existed here, nothing except the dome. It stood alone in the empty sand, scarred and patched and ugly. But it stood. Against a storm that would have buried cities, against a planet that wanted them dead, against all the odds that the universe could stack against them. It stood. Tywin turned back to look at Doan, unconscious, but alive on the floor of the dome. "You did it," he whispered. "You crazy, stubborn, impossible human. You did it." 21 days after the crash, a ship appeared in the sky. Commander Velis of the Galactic Union patrol vessel. Starlight watched the sensor readings with confusion. His mission was simple: investigate the crash site of the transport ship, Eternal Dawn, and recover any salvageable technology or remains. Standard procedure. Expected outcome: nothing. Velaris 7 was a dead planet. The great storm that had passed through the region a week ago would have erased any trace of the wreckage, but his sensors were showing something impossible. "Sir," his navigation officer said, "we're detecting structures on the surface. Artificial structures." "That's not possible." "Nothing survives on Velaris 7. The readings are clear, sir. Multiple buildings. Heat signatures indicating biological life." Velis leaned forward in his command chair. He was Talic, a species known throughout the galaxy for their engineering genius. His people had built the first ships to cross between stars. They had constructed stations that orbited black holes. They understood construction better than any other species in the known universe. And yet, according to his instruments, someone had built a settlement on a planet where building was impossible. "Take us down," he ordered. "I want to see this for myself." The patrol ship landed 300 meters from the structures. Velis walked out onto the sand with the security team behind him, his protective suit shielding him from the hostile atmosphere. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. It was not just one building. It was 3, connected by covered walkways. The main structure was a dome, roughly constructed, but clearly functional. 2 smaller buildings extended from it, one appearing to be some kind of greenhouse, the other a storage facility. Water collection systems surrounded the complex, their curved surfaces catching the morning dew, and on top of the main dome, a human was working. The human looked up as the patrol team approached. He was burned and scarred, his arms wrapped in rough bandages. But he stood straight, unafraid, and continued his work even as the aliens closed in. "Gear early," the human said. "I was expecting another week before anyone came." Bless's translator processed the words, but he still could not understand them. Early. This human had been stranded on a dead planet for 3 weeks, with no equipment, no supplies, no way to call for help. He should be dead. He should have died in the crash, or the heat, or the cold, or the great storm that had swept through this region. Instead, he was standing on a roof he had apparently built himself, complaining about the timing of his rescue. "Who are you?" Velis demanded. "Park Doan, engineer, survivor." The human climbed down from the roof and stood before the alien commander. Up close, Velis could see just how damaged he was. Burns covered his arms and back. His hands were scarred and calloused. His eyes were bloodshot, his face gaunt from malnutrition and exhaustion. But he was alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. "How is this possible?" Velis asked. He gestured at the buildings, at the water collectors, at the entire settlement that should not exist. "Our records show the transport ship was carrying over 200 passengers. The crash should have been total. Nothing could have survived the impact in the storm that followed." 200 passengers, Doan agreed. 3 survivors. All human, and you've built all of this. With what equipment? What tools? Doan smiled. It was a tired smile, worn and faded, but there was something sharp behind it. "No equipment," he said. "No tools. Just sand and sunlight and stubbornness." Velis stared at him. Then he walked past the human and entered the main dome. Inside, he found 2 more humans. A woman was tending to plants in the greenhouse section, coaxing life from the hostile soil. A man with a bandaged leg was organizing supplies, humming quietly to himself. They looked up when Velis entered, but they did not seem surprised or afraid. "Commander," the woman said. "Welcome to our home." "Your home," Velis repeated. He looked around the interior. The walls were rough, made of some material he did not recognize. Glass and sand fused together in layers. He touched the surface and felt its strength. His engineering instincts told him this material was remarkable. Simple, crude, but remarkably effective. "How did you make these walls?" he asked. "Concentrated sunlight," the woman said. "We used a reflective dish to focus the sun's heat. The sand here is rich in silicon. Melt it, and it becomes glass. Layer the glass with raw sand, and it becomes something stronger." Velis ran his hand along the wall again. His people had been building starships for 10,000 years. They had materials science laboratories that could create substances atom by atom, and yet he had never seen anything quite like this. Not because it was advanced, but because it was so simple. "Your species," he said slowly. "You have no natural advantages. You are soft, fragile, short-lived. Your homeworld is mild compared to most. How did you survive here when everyone else died?" The man with the bandaged leg answered. "The others trusted their technology. When the technology failed, they had nothing else. They didn't know how to survive without it, and humans learned to survive before we had technology. We learned to think, to adapt, to make something from nothing." He gestured around the dome. "This isn't advanced. It's ancient. Our ancestors were doing this thousands of years before we reached the stars. We just remembered how." Velis was silent for a long moment. He thought about his own people, about how dependent they had become on their machines and their systems. A Talix stranded on this planet would have done exactly what the other passengers had done. They would have waited for rescue. They would have trusted their emergency beacons and their survival equipment. And when those things failed, they would have died. These humans had no such trust. They had no expectation that the universe would save them. So they had saved themselves. "I need to file a report," Velis said finally. "The Galactic Union will want to know how this was possible." "Tell them whatever you want," Doan said. He had entered the dome and was standing near the entrance, watching the alien commander with unreadable eyes. "We're just glad to be going home," Velis nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more question," he said. "Why didn't you just wait for rescue? You must have known someone would come eventually." Doan looked at him. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Anger, maybe, or pride, or something deeper that Velis could not name. "Your people had everything," Doan said. "The best technology, the best equipment, the best training. They died waiting for someone else to save them." He stepped forward, and despite his injuries, despite his exhaustion, he seemed to grow larger somehow. "We had nothing. So we built something. That's what humans do. We don't wait. We don't quit. And we don't need your pity or your tools to survive." He walked past Velis, out into the sunlight. "We just need time. And we always find a way to take it." 3 weeks later, Commander Velis submitted his report to the Galactic Union Council. It was a simple document, mostly technical details about the rescue and the recovered survivors. But at the end, in the section reserved for species assessment, he wrote something that would be discussed in council chambers for years to come. Under the heading Threat Assessment, wrote, "Recommend against hostile engagement. Humans do not require infrastructure to establish dominance. They create it from nothing. They survived conditions that killed every other species aboard the AGC. Eternal Dawn. They built shelter from sand and determination. They made water from air and ingenuity. They turned a dead planet into a home. Every world they land on becomes human territory. Not because they conquer it, but because they refuse to accept that it cannot be lived on. They are not the strongest species. They are not the smartest. But they are the most stubborn, the most adaptable, and the most dangerous. Because a human with nothing is still a human. And a human will always find a way."